In this video, we're going to continue our exploration of bringing stills to life by animating it within After Effects. In part 1, we used Photoshop to cut out subjects from a photo using the object selection tools to do this easily, and then we used generative AI to extend the boundaries of our image, not to mention clone in the areas that we cut out. Part 2 is all about animation. We're going to bring in the layers of our photo into After Effects. We're going to add a camera for movement, add a shallow depth of field, not to mention use the puppet tool to animate our characters. All right, I'm here inside of After Effects, and here's the animation that we'll be working towards. You can see there we got some separation between Johnny Cash and the two fans, not to mention the background, and several effects working to transition the photo in, not to mention add some more depth to the overall imagery. Okay, let's start off by bringing in the asset. I'm going to double click here in the project panel. Here's the Johnny Cash cutout that we worked with. I'm going to import this in as a composition retaining the layer sizes. So I'll get all of my layers in a composition, not to mention the anchor point of each layer directly in the center versus the center of the Photoshop file. I'm going to choose Open. We get a screen that repeats the import kind and tells us if we want to retain any editable layer styles. In this case, it doesn't matter, so we'll press OK. Here's a folder with all of the individual layers, not to mention the composition just above it, which I'll double click, showing us everything that we brought in. So I'll solo each element here, so we get a sense for all of the cutouts that we did in part 1, including the background. In this case, I don't need the original layer or the wall and couch copy here in the background, so I'll click and command click those and just press delete. Another thing to note is that if I go to my composition settings, right now this is set to a duration of just over 10 seconds, which we want, and the width, although it's close to 16:9, isn't quite that of dimensions for what we want to use, which is UHD. So we're going to handle that at the very end. I'm going to cancel out of here. And first thing first, let's make everything 3D by clicking and dragging in the 3D column. And I'll also parent the Johnny color layer to the Johnny layer and just turn off the color layer for the time being. We're going to turn it off so that we can focus on the other layers within the composition, placing them within 3D space. Now, before we begin though, it's important to add a camera to our scene so that any changes that we make will be retained. I'm going to head to my layer menu and choose New Camera. I do want to choose a 2-node camera. We'll also enable depth of field. I have a very low f-stop, so low in fact that this doesn't even exist in real life, but we'll add some lovely shallow depth of field, 0.7. I'll press OK, and everything becomes blurry. Temporarily, I'll make sure the camera is above everything else. I'm just going to double click the camera just to turn off enable depth of field for the time being. Now, let's start to separate each of these layers. First off, I want Johnny to be closest to the camera. A few different ways that I have of repositioning him. In this case, I'm just going to press the P for position, and we are going to move him up -300 pixels in the Z axis. As you can see, Johnny Cash gets a lot bigger. We want to scale him down and then also position him back in X space so there isn't a hole in our photo. I'll press Shift S to bring up the scale. I'm going to scale this down quite a bit, and then just drag and reposition it here within the frame. I'll scale him down even a little bit more. Looks like 60% is just about right, getting him to position, but still having him -300 pixels ahead. The magical part about this is because we parented the Johnny color layer to Johnny, it moves with it. Now let's work with the middle fan. We don't want her to be so close, so I'm just going to press P for position. And in this case, she's quite close to the couch. I'm going to make it -100 in terms of her position. Then I'm going to press S to scale her down to 90% and then reposition her over a little bit. Now let's work with the fan on the right-hand side, P for position. I'll bring her up quite a bit, so -200, and then press Shift S to bring her down in scale. And again, reposition her just right so that we don't see this as a photo cutout. So just to see how these layers look in 3D space, I'm going to go to my camera views here and just choose 2 views. On the right-hand side, I have my top view, and here I can see the background layer. I'll now command up arrow so I can see the next layer, which happens to be my fan right, the other layer, which is the middle fan, and then Johnny here in the foreground. This is how our scene looks. I'll go back to my camera to double-click it and enable depth of field. Another thing I'll do in this view is actually move the anchor point so it's behind the couch. This will make sure that there are no errors when we actually do a dolly move. Now I'll exit my camera views. So I'll go back to one view. So here is my active camera. I want to do a rack focus over 3 seconds from the middle fan over to Johnny. A really cool, easy way to achieve this is to select your camera and then command click the layer that you want to focus. In this case, I'm going to go to my layer menu, and where you see camera, we're going to choose set focus distance to layer. Not link, but set in this case. Now she's in focus and my subjects here in the foreground are out of focus. I can select my camera and press AA to see all of the camera controls, but the property that we just switched happens to be focus distance, and I'm going to add a keyframe next to that. Now I'm going to go to 3 seconds, select the camera. With the camera selected, now command click Johnny, and now go to layer, camera, set focus distance to layer. And since we added that keyframe on the property, I'm just going to press U, we can see the focus distance changes. Now we have a lovely rack focus from our middle subject over to Johnny. And I'll press AA in this case just to change the iris shape and see those properties. I'm going to make it a heptagon. The blur level of 211 is just fine. And I could also play with highlight gain and other properties to make this even more believable. Next up, I'm going to just press P for camera position. We've already affected the anchor point. And just add a keyframe next to position. Move all the way down to 10 seconds, where we'll slowly start to zoom in. And you may notice that there are some undesirable areas of the photo, which we can correct by manipulating each of these layers. Right now, by just scrubbing this, we can see the effect this separation has had on our actual photos. In this case, I'm going to just move back to the beginning and correct some of the movement. On the middle fan, I'm going to press P for position and add a keyframe, and then actually move her a bit in X space so she's further behind this subject here. I'll also just do a little bit of correction here with Johnny. P for position, add a keyframe here at the beginning, and just have him move down a little bit there in the frame. So here we have the camera move. And one thing that we want to notice is Johnny Cash is now out of focus just because of our camera movement. I'm going to make sure he is in focus at the end of this. So again, I'm going to select the camera, select Johnny, and go to layer, camera, last but not least, set focus distance to layer. So this is going to just change throughout. Eventually he gets in focus, and as we can see, he stays in focus as that camera moves. Now let's actually add some movement to Johnny using After Effects' puppet tool. I'm going to go back to the beginning of my composition and just hide all of the properties that are showing. Now I'm going to select the Johnny layer, and with him selected, the puppet tool. I'm going to turn off the mesh for the time being, and let's add some pins specifically on Johnny's head here, his neck, his shoulders, elbow, forearm, and his hand. And just by simply making these points, notice that we're able to make changes here to the mesh. In fact, I'll actually also add one above here. And another thing we can do is also add starch pins to help define areas that are more rigid than more flexible, like the pins that I've just added. And how we do that is just underneath the puppet tool is our puppet starch tool. And I'll show the mesh in this case. And if we simply just add a point at certain sections, we define these as rigid. So I'll just define this part here as rigid. So Johnny Cash's arm is flexible, but this is all stamped down. You can also do this close to Johnny Cash's torso and maybe around other areas, depending on our animation needs. Now that we have some pins, on the Johnny layer, if you press U, you'll be able to see all of the puppet pins that you've added. if you select the puppet effect, you'll see again the pins that we've added. And if you select one of those, it will highlight that puppet pin. I'm just going to move forward all the way to 10 seconds. So we have a gradual movement of Johnny's head looking down. Again, I want to pay attention to making sure that I don't add too much distortion to the image here. So we could adjust other pins to make sure that the image looks right. And also here at the end, I'll add just a little bit of hand movement. And these subtle movements can go a long way to bringing your stills to life. All right, so here is the subtle Johnny Cash movement there. Pretty relaxed over time. You can even add some movement to each of the fans here as well. We brought in our Photoshop file, separated the layers, added some camera animation, used the puppet tool to animate the Johnny Cash character, and then played around with shallow depth of field. Join us for part 3. We're going to be exploring Boris FX's Continuum and Sapphire to enhance our photo, bringing it to life. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and check us out at borisfx.com.